I sat through the last presentation. It was terrific. Hopefully this one is at least equal to that. This one, I will start by saying, is a little bit different than the last one I saw, and if you've seen others, it may be different than that. The difference really stems from kind of our starting point on this presentation. We're here to talk today about data gravity, and specifically the ramifications of data gravity in the public sector, so at all levels. And that starting point really is what has driven out kind of the difference in this presentation. It's less of a presentation, it's more of a discussion about a white paper that we've developed over the last, I guess, 3 months or so, with the help of people from both the buy side and the sell side of this public sector kind of continuum. So we worked with a company called InsightaaS, who are also kind of founding members of DC Foresight. We worked with them to do the research with customers and with some of our vendor partners around data gravity. And it kind of, as I was thinking through the presentation and what we were going to talk about, tied very much into some of the main panel presentations and discussions this morning. Specifically, one of the CIOs was mentioning continuously, think about things from the end user or the customer's perspective. And that's guidance that we can all, kind of take as vendors to heart, because sometimes we kind of get so excited about what we're doing and what the impact will be on our customers that we don't stop and think about what their lives are all about day in and day out. And so that's why we kind of assembled the panel we did. So I'm just going to take you through some of the key highlights of the research that we've done. The paper was released simultaneous to this event. It is available for download. There's a QR code coming up later if you want a copy of it. And obviously that paper has much more detail around our research and what we discovered through that research. So we're going to take you through kind of the highlights, and I've got 4 people here who contributed to the research who can bring some color commentary to what we found, and I can question them through the process to kind of bring out how we got to the realizations that we did as it pertains to data gravity in the public sector. So first, just a little bit about ourselves. We are a technology integrator, solutions provider, North American in scope, in fact global. We have operations in China. We've been in business since 1983. I would say most recently we're focused on integration, data center solutions, virtualization, automation, orchestration, management of data center infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure, and then managed services to help customers kind of deliver that infrastructure and that capability that they need to sort of fuel that engine room that Roman was talking about earlier today. And so our perspective on this, obviously coming in, was to really understand from our customers, from the customer side, what does data gravity mean to them, right? We kind of had this concept of data gravity. It was coming up in conversations as we talked to customers about moving to a more hybrid IT environment, private cloud, public cloud, where data resided. We would hear these kind of concepts coming up about data gravity and the ramifications on their businesses, their organizations, and we really wanted to explore that in more detail from their perspective, so we understood the kind of guidance we would need to be providing to our customers going forward as we were talking to them about various solutions that we had to deliver to them. I think you guys already know about DC Foresight and all the good work they're doing here. Originated or started last year, 2018. This is the second event. It's been expanded to include a day focused predominantly on academia. We're an original kind of sponsor of this organization and this effort and are finding it to be of great value in a way of kind of communicating across the community that are interested in kind of data center solutions and considerations. So hopefully today is as successful as last year. So let me get to our panel, and there's one gentleman missing who I will introduce last, but with us today we have Robert Downey at the front of the table here, Manager Institutional Research with Fanshawe College. We have Charlie Anchetta, who is with the Province of Ontario, Senior Manager Transformation and Modernization, and Steve Gesner, the former EVP Technology and Operations of eHealth Ontario. I'm here as a moderator. And to my right is Bob Hall. He's our senior solution architect and runs our cloud operations within TIG Canada. And so I want you to think a little bit as we move into this discussion about the roles that these gentlemen have played in their organizations most recently, because when you start to look at the research and you start to look at the findings, what you see is the role that you play, the persona that you present within your organization has an impact on your perception of data gravity. So just keep that in mind as we go forward, and you'll see it kind of how it manifests in the research that we've done. So I thought we'd start with what is kind of data gravity, and like I said, this is I've been around in the IT industry for a long time, almost just over 30 years actually, and if I think about over that time frame, all of the terms and concepts and acronyms that have come to the fore, there's many of them, right? Cloud, digital transformation, IT transformation, just to name a few that are recent. And often when they first come into kind of the lexicon of our environment, there is a lack of clarity or absolute ambiguity about what they mean, right? What is digital transformation? I can say myself, I only recently have reconciled digital transformation versus IT transformation and other concepts like that. And so we felt it would be beneficial as this entered the lexicon to really get a common understanding of it and to understand most importantly its impact on our clients. And so at its core, the graphic I think does a pretty good job of representing what we're talking about here. So in the middle, if you can't see it, it says data is placed in an environment, and cloud is in brackets. It could be cloud, it may not be cloud, but data is placed in an environment. And then over time, latency-sensitive applications are placed near the data in the same cloud environment or in the same environment in proximity to where the data is. As additional applications are deployed in the cloud, to capitalize on increasing data, you see this growing application and services portfolio surrounding these data repositories. They're exerting effectively gravity on those services and those applications that are necessary to run your business, your institution, your entity. And so that gravity continues to have an impact on kind of future development and is something that public sector organizations, we think, need to think about in terms of their vulnerability as a result of that propensity of the applications and the services to follow the data. They need to think about changing supplier models, changing cost structures, performance, T's and C's, and things like that. And so this concept of kind of data gravity is one that we put out to key stakeholders, and they fed back to us kind of their perception of it. Michael and Mary did a great job of then kind of capturing that in a paper that, as I said, will be made available at the end of this presentation. So with that introduction in terms of what data gravity is, I just wanted to touch upon or get to a couple of questions. And I'll start with Charlie, because Charlie, I don't know, hopefully I didn't catch you off guard there, Charlie. I'm going to start with Charlie because when we had the conversation around the definition, Charlie, we've kind of got a snowball effect here, right? Kind of this thing's rolling and it's capturing all these services and applications. When we talked about it, Charlie specifically referenced kind of an analog of a solar system in terms of how the various planets in a solar system have different gravitational pull and how you can kind of extrapolate that to the way this concept of data gravity works. And so I thought I'd start by asking Charlie to talk us through kind of the process in government and how that evolves, how this happens in government from your perspective.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. First, it always starts with a conversation with our stakeholders and clients. So in our case, it would be the ministry application owners. And they would have these discussions with us in terms of, hey, we want to modernize these applications. These are our requirements. Can you help us put together typically these things happen in a three-year type strategy. So we would meet with them, we would talk with them, and we'd say, yeah, we can help you. We are as Eugene would say, the engine of the Ontario government. Our data centers, fuel that that vehicle to enable all these applications. And so what we found is, as we work with our stakeholders in understanding the requirements, we would build, the data infrastructure, the server infrastructure, the network infrastructure to meet that so that they can deliver for their clients. And their clients are us, right, Ontarians, in terms of the services that they provide. And what we found is, as we start to architect that infrastructure, we're finding that, as one application comes online, because the data is centric in that engine, in that data center, other applications, as they start to come online or start to mature as part of that big solution, they have to be close to where all that's being architected. And hence that gravity or pull into.
You start to see that impact.
Yeah, when we were a largely distributed environment 10 years ago across 22 data centers. And so, the first recognition is, well, if we're gonna standardize and modernize, we've got to consolidate to a smaller footprint that makes sense, and then grow and scale up from there. And that's where we saw that data gravity effect happening. But again, it all starts with that conversation with our clients in terms of, hey, what's your objective? What do you want to accomplish at the end of this? And then we'll partner with you to help enable that.
So it's an interesting couple of points, I think, in that. One is, cloud was in brackets here. We live in a hybrid world today. We've got our cloud service provider partner here sitting in the back of the room. So that's the reality. But you described, data gravity manifesting in a more legacy type environment where you owned and operated all of those data centers, but they were distributed. And so where that data was started, you could see that gravitational pull even before the cloud.
I'll say that's our sort of first phase of our grand scheme. The evolution of that strategy is now the pull to the cloud. Right? Everyone has bought into that direct activity, that go to the cloud. It's cheaper, it's efficient. You get away from your capex, you go to your opex, and then you can scale out, be more flexible that way. And again, it starts with that conversation with our clients. Okay, now that we've consolidated and standardized into our engine, how do we go to the next step, which is the cloud, or a hybrid configuration with cloud and on-premise.
And then I guess within that, considering this gravitational pull that you've already identified as that data goes out to the cloud, that needs to be part of the consideration set, right? Because you're now potentially taking more than you expect, right?
Yeah, in some of the presentation that we heard yesterday, there's your data center, and then there's what's called the fog space, which is sort of the mid-tier, and then you have your edge, and then you have your endpoint devices. We're quickly accelerating to the applications being in that endpoint space, but the computing still has to happen back in the engine.
Right.
Whether it's in our prem or on a cloud environment. We gotta. So our architectural challenge is to, put that in a mesh or a grid that works, and our role now becomes from that, bricks and mortar operational role to now a broker to what goes in the cloud.
So lots to consider as you guys kind of get on that journey of cloud, and the ramifications of data gravity are one of, yeah.
That's always the biggest challenge. The next biggest challenge is, how do I get that money to invest?
Right.
And the answer is, once you use your savings. Hold on a second. I need to invest before.
You got a savings account, you're ready to go. Yeah, got it. I think next question for Steve. And Steve, your background, extensive background in healthcare, does this same concept resonate as Charlie's been describing it in the healthcare realm?
Well, healthcare is an interesting one because the data keeps growing and growing and growing. So as an example, the x-ray of my hand when it broke 40 years ago is still stored somewhere. No one ever looks at it, but it's still there. And what the e-health mandate was to collect information, collect patient data. So drugs, lab tests, images, immunization, hospital data. Anytime any of those events happen, it gets written in one of these databases. So it continues to grow and grow and grow. In fact, the fastest growing thing in healthcare is actually the audit data. So eHealth has a repository called the Provincial Client Registry. There's 13.7, 13.8 million Ontarians, 27 million records in that repository. We have a few dupes in there, not as bad as BC. They have like 150,000 patients. But every time a clinician looks at any of that data, we throw off audit data. In fact, it's all driven by the privacy office. So anytime someone comes in and looks, let's say at that x-ray, which no one would ever do, but it's who looked at it, when did they look at it, how long did they look at it for, and oh, just in case we get audited, let's take a copy of the data that was looked at and store that. So we've got 27 million patient records in this repository, and now 600 million audit logs, and it grows every day. So it's almost like a black hole, and it will eventually get subsumed in itself. But the data storage is one of the biggest challenges we have, Paul, and it's not going to stop.
Snowballing as well. Yeah, fascinating, and I love that comment about the black hole, right? We had the solar system. I'm talking to Steve about this a little bit earlier today, and he mentioned this concept of the black hole in the solar system, which I hadn't thought about. But these records, these logs are not uncommon, as you all know, right? There are many types of logs and records that must be kept pertaining to data and interaction with that data for various reasons. Could be privacy, could be security, and that is expanding at an exponential rate as well. And so it just is another form of this concept of data and the sources of data becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and that gravitational pull as a result of that size becoming greater over time. So Steve, last question on this topic. Do you see this as a problem? Is it something you're concerned about, or do we just have to be aware of it?
For a storage company, I think it was a great opportunity. We have started down, and I left the agency just a little over a week ago. We had started down the path of looking at the privacy requirements, because these data retention requirements are driven by privacy concerns. You know, in banking, the rule of thumb is 7 years. In healthcare, I think it's 35 years. And anything that was captured on me 35 years ago, probably not going to help a doctor figure out what's wrong with me today. So hopefully we can start to get some bounds around that and put some logic around how long do you have to keep this data. And the other thing is how long do you have to keep the data in online storage? Can we move this into ice boxes, because that x-ray from 40 years ago is only going to be fetched once every 10 years. So can we take advantage of technology so we can start to age the data out and put it in much cheaper platforms the longer it is, but the older it is, I should say.
Right. Yeah, lots of related things. As we were talking in the main session today, you know, I just, it's amazing when you start to think about the way these hybrid IT systems work and where the data is and how it moves from point A to point B, in terms of how this concept of data gravity really is impactful across that entire kind of ecosystem. Just to move forward with the time constraints that we have, this slide shows, I've kind of labeled it, you know, the tension across the operational roles. And this was another finding that, frankly, I didn't expect to see, but it did become clear to us as the research evolved. And really, this is where I was getting to earlier about, you know, the different personas, the different stakeholders in all organizations and their perspective on data gravity and whether it's a problem or not, or they even need to be aware of it. And so what this talks about is the different kind of roles in the organization. The IT strategist, who is primarily interested in balancing cost functionality, wants to avoid lock-in, wants to avoid, you know, disadvantaged downstream charges and changes to rates and those kind of things, right? These things are important in terms of running an IT operation. The analytics or business executive, primarily interested in the quality of the output and you know, balancing, but with a need to balance cost and control and relevance, optimizing return on data investment. there's increasingly large teams of people in every organization we deal with that analyze data, that deal with data, right? It's a whole sort of undertaking on its own case today. But they've got a particular need for that data and access to that data. And then the users, primarily interested in access to the greatest amount of data, not interested in gravity or other restrictions. These were the findings that came out of that. And so, out of that comes some questions, I think. And the first one really was to Rob. And as I said, Rob in his role, and as I better understood it today, was a key contributor to this point. But the question I'm going to ask you, Rob, is how does data gravity look from your perspective? And I know part of your responsibility is decision report, compliance, operational research. Rob's got a broad portfolio of responsibilities at Fanshawe College, very interesting portfolio. But it did bring this question to mind was, kind of how does it look from your perspective? What are your thoughts on it, Rob?
So, in a sense, I'm a customer of the IT, the data supplier to me. Never really thought about data gravity, but it impacts me every day. We live in a hybrid system. We have third-party suppliers with cloud. Some of the data in the cloud are 2 different clouds, and we have on-premise that's a legacy system. It's easier for us now to get data back in the cloud. It's the legacy system that I would identify that has data gravity because everything's there, and it's so customized and it's been around so long that they're having, there's a real struggle to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, and we'll have real challenges accessing that data. And it's built another layer because the data is there and now it has to be extracted and we have it. So, it's duplicated, replicated. And so that's what data gravity is to me.
And Rob and I had an interesting conversation yesterday about some work he's doing, some research they're doing on student retention within the college system, specifically Fanshawe College, and the types of data sources that they're looking at and trying to identify correlation between that data, that outcome, that circumstance, and the ability to retain students at Fanshawe College, right? And these are, so I thought that was really interesting. Maybe you can expand for the team here or the group here.
Sure,
on.
Data scientists I work with, their hand up.
Okay.
This is here. So we're looking. We have students come in as applicants, and then some make a selection and come to Fanshawe, and then they start their coursework. And so we have internal data, the legacy on the legacy system, and we have learning management system data that's in the cloud. We're trying to integrate it. We have to bring it all back into the college because the analytics are internal. So it's to take the data from the back end legacy system, put it into Hadoop, as Ling uses, take the cloud data, bring it back into the college into Hadoop, and then machine learning. Well, from my perspective, magically happens. With Ling's skill set, and we're just looking at early student behaviors in those early weeks using the LMS behaviors to identify students that are at risk. So it's an early prediction model.
So business critical in many ways, right? For those of you who know the college system, attracting students to your college is key. Retaining them, particularly in the first 3, 4, 6 weeks, is absolutely key because if you lose them, you lose the funding that goes along with them. And so you can't afford to do that, right? And so here's this group doing this work, predictive analytics based on a bunch of different data sources that is a great example of how, this kind of work, analytics, is attracted to that data. It's kind of a binary, right? It has to be that way. So Charlie, as a strategist for the province, an IT strategist, kind of how do you respond to this observation and this finding? What are your thoughts on this tension that exists within organizations? Do you see it? Is it a reality?
Yeah, it is a reality. Tension is always good because then it brings out the ideas that spawn innovation to solve problems, right? And you know, like our strategy is typically over a 3-year horizon, right? And if we can look beyond 3 years, that's great. It's pretty difficult based on how technology changes so rapidly, you know, even from a 6-month cycle. So again, the key is working closely with our customer partners, with our vendor suppliers and partners, and making sure that directionally we're headed in the right, with the right strategy.
Right.
In terms of data, absolutely, there'll always be a need to have that data on-prem for whatever compliance or regulatory reasons. But for the data that's medium to low sensitivity, let's put it in space where it's more economical, right, and where we can scale up. You know, when I modernized the email system back in 2013, I think we moved over 1 billion objects, 500 terabytes, and now that's almost quadrupled in size. And again, a lot of that data no one touches. Right?
Right.
And so there's got to be a more efficient, economical way to put that data. And then these days, everything is emerging as a service. Take advantage of that.
Great. And Steve, last question on this topic. So, you know, in an executive capacity, you would often have to go to boards and explain strategies and get approval for strategies, I'm assuming. This concept of, you just flew by the seat of your pants, right? So how does this, you know, is this something that you would consider explaining to or making part of your strategy, at least that you've addressed these concerns around, you know, lock-in and various users' desire for data?
I think the key thing, Paul, in going to the board is demonstrating you're delivering value. And one of the speakers in the prior section just talked about the fact data is limitless. So in the healthcare sector, everyone and their brother and sister and mother and dad is trying to do data analytics. There's enough data lakes out there, you know, to populate the world. In contrast, St. Mike's, they said, we have an issue here. We want to improve the quality of care in our internal medicine team. So they started capturing data around every interaction their internal medicine team had with patients, analyzed it, and started to understand best practices. And then, you know, people say doctors don't like to listen. They had the facts. They would sit down with the doctor. This is the process that works best for this condition. And they've driven thousands of dollars of savings because they're now going on best practices and getting patients feeling better faster. Other organizations, you know, simple things like understanding arrival rates in the emergency room. So when you go into the Oakville Hospital, where I live, they don't do that. So you could go in there on a busy time, there'll be 3 doctors in there. And you could go in a slack time, there'll be 20 of them sitting around, it seems. Humber River analyzes arrival rates and constantly changes their staffing based on time of day, seasonality, all that other good stuff. So if I'm going to the board and I'm saying I'm going to spend a wackadoo on this, I want to go and say, and here's what we're trying to do, and here are the results we expect to see. And oh, by the way, I was here 6 months ago, and here's what we've done.
And I think the other thing that I heard there that is you know, increasingly becoming, I think, prevailing kind of wisdom is that, you know, it's the value in the data, not the data itself, right? Not all data is valuable. And as the economist said a few months back, you know, data is becoming the new oil, right? Which again sort of lends credence to some of the things that we're talking about here around this gravitational pull. Data is really the lifeblood of all organizations, all applications, all services, and when done well, you know, those things deliver the value that Steve's talking about. Let me see if I can move forward here. See, I knew Bob would come in handy. So, second last point of discussion here before we wrap up was just really kind of looking at the forces that are shaping data gravity in the marketplace. And we kind of saw 3 primary sources here that are kind of shaping this thing for us. And I think we've already talked about some of these when you see them here. So increased availability of data, data sources, and potential use of the data in guiding operations and decisions. Rob's talked about that, Steve's talked about that, Charlie's talked about that, all of the people on the panel talked about that, right? That there is a never-ending availability of data. It is expanding rapidly. It is usually stored and retained for further analysis and exploration of value. Expanded user need for data access. People and users within an organization have a need for that data so they can be more efficient and more effective in transacting their role, whatever that may be, or leading their organization in the way that they need to. And then the last one that has been more recent, and particularly for public sector, is an increased trust in cloud service providers or services. And this is where, you know, from a TIG perspective, we first were kind of tweaked, our interest was tweaked because we are in the cloud services business with our partner ThinkOn here at the back of the room. And, you know, we saw customers and competitors being drawn to, frankly, marketing strategies that were capitalizing on the concept of data gravity. There were lost leaders around data storage that were specifically driven to pull data into a particular place with a certain knowledge that other applications and services and requirements would be drawn towards that data over time. And so that was kind of what tweaked our interest. But the good news was, you know, that there was this increasing trust in cloud service providers as a place to store the data, perhaps at scale, right? So, Bob, let's bring Bob into the conversation here. So from your perspective, Bob, which of these issues do you see as the primary driver of data gravity? What of these three is kind of shaping our customers' opinions on this?
I think expanded need for user access to the data is really one of the big drivers for moving it to the cloud. We've been, you know, meeting with customers. I get to look at it from a different perspective than you guys do because we get to meet with all the people who want to go to the cloud or have been mandated to go to the cloud and they're trying to figure out what to do. And what we've really learned is that as an organization makes a decision with some data, it gets out there. They realize that there was a lot more uses for it than they had before because there's more people who can access it and more information that they can mine out of that data. And suddenly they start looking at other things that they have that they keep, you know, traditionally hidden inside of their data center that only small groups or pockets can reach at, or it's on somebody's server that's underneath a desk somewhere. And they start thinking about moving that out to the cloud. And as soon as they do that, they make it more available to people. And that's, you know, from my perspective of doing this for the last couple of years, I think that's the
driver.
biggest driver.
Yeah, and as somebody mentioned data lakes, and you know, I can't tell you how many customers are looking at those concepts, right, of sort of aggregating and creating these data lakes that are ubiquitously available to all users that need them. Great concepts, but you know, something that people need to be a little bit careful around in terms of what they're creating and what the downstream implications are going to be. So Rob, I'm going to ask you relatively the same question. Which of these forces echoes most with you as an issue causing data to kind of clump or to kind of create that gravitational pull?
So for me, I'm a customer, but I also serve customers, and it's the customer questions that drive our seeking and then requesting access to data to answer questions.
So it's kind of two of these in a way, right?
Well, for me, it's driven by the leaders' questions.
So you're the chief information officer then.
I'm one of those. I'm the middleman between the questions and the data.
So you've got a lot of users out there that want access to the data so they can answer questions, or you can help them answer questions. Is that?
Well, they would rather that we answer the questions.
Yeah.
They ask the questions. We're trying to do, you know, self-service dashboards. That's requires a culture change in the college system. People are used to having the answer appear in their inbox or by paper, whatever. So.
Thank you. Charlie, what's your perspective on this? What's having the greatest impact on the operations of the provincial government in terms of these forces?
Increased availability of data. You know, we've had incidents where if a customer can't get access to their data in a timely manner that they need it, then, you know, health claims, billion-dollar health claims processing will happen for a month, and that would be disastrous. You know, if another customer can't get access to their specific data, no one in the OPS is gonna get paid, right? And I'm looking at Sham over there and you know, so these days, it's not only increased availability, but as our enterprise CIO would say, you know, slow is the new down. You gotta make sure that that data is accessible, you know, all the time, anywhere, and secure. Right? That's our biggest
Interesting,
challenge. And regardless of, you know, the data gravity situation, is, again, on-prem or off-prem, it's gotta meet those, you know, main pillars of being accessible anywhere, anytime, and secure.
It's interesting because there's a couple of things that sort of come to mind there. One is, you know, there was the example on the panel of the 11-year-old with the spinning clock, and slow is the new down is another version of that, right? That people's expectations are immediate access to data. And the other piece that is just prevalent across these conversations today is the sources of the data, right? Whether it be log reports, whether it be IoT devices, whether it be any number of things that we hadn't contemplated or needed to contemplate previously, that explosion is occurring, right? There is more data than we would have ever perhaps contemplated. So I'm just going to move quickly forward to the best practices. And again, these are just the highlights of the full report. Full report is about 22 pages long and obviously contains a lot of insight into these different things. So really what we did was we broke out the best practices into 3 categories, but you'll notice the middle category is actually a combination of the 2 other categories, things that kind of fit in the middle. So from a technical perspective, you know, recommendations were that you build frameworks that support data portability. Your ability to move data from various locations to others is key. Deploying cloud agnostic software-defined infrastructure, right? Something you've heard from the keynote panelists today, that it is important that we all move to kind of a software-defined posture wherever possible. It brings agility and other things that aren't possible, frankly, in kind of a legacy environment. And wherever possible, build applications on containers. Again, it just enhances kind of portability, security, a variety of other things. And then from a business perspective, you know, looking to address policy issues, embedding security in applications and processes. And there are technologies that sort of underpin all of these things, but these are, you know, from a business perspective. And involving stakeholders, I think we've heard that several times, right, is that multiple people within an organization need to be thinking about the concept of where this data is and what kind of gravitational pull it's creating. And then, you know, when you combine the 2, you're looking at identifying data gravity issues and appropriate solutions. And I think it may be circumstance and case specific, right? As we start to go through it, each of these individuals as 3 kind of personas, 3 roles within organizations are presenting concepts and ideas that are relevant to their organization but different from each other with different considerations around the ramifications of data gravity. Could be the applications they're running, could be the data they're moving. And then, you know, always focusing on data integrity, process support, and user experience. So, question to any of the panelists. Can you identify one element that you think is particularly important to successfully navigating future data gravity considerations? Any of these elements that kind of stand out might have been your suggestion.
You know, on the business side, that last bullet, those statements, you know, I continue to get encouraged that, you know, when I come forward with a business case, you know, what's your alignment with strategy? You know, what is the value and savings? And most importantly, you know, are you meeting your stakeholder expectation and user experience? If you can't answer those 3 questions, you better go back and redo that business case.
Yep. Steve.
So I'd go with security now. Healthcare is an interesting one. After the last wave of malware hit, ransomware, everyone figured out how to back up everything. So great, that's good for your business. You got to back up everything. But the challenge you have is if the systems get compromised, you're screwed. So you're the CEO of a hospital, and your CIO calls up and says, we've got malware, but it'll be cleared up in 48 hours. That's not bad. Or she calls up and says, we've got an issue, we've got a note saying someone's compromised our system, they randomly change patient records for 5,000 patients. What is more scary? So that's why security, certainly in healthcare, is critical, because if you start getting lack of integrity in the patient records, you can cause real havoc in people's health.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when you look at the data that we're talking about here and the security and privacy requirements, they do, there is, we're seeing the government actually move, the federal government move to kind of categorizing data. You'll see it on all the forms you fill out, right? Protected A, protected B, secret, stuff like that. And they're authorizing and certifying cloud service providers and others to deliver solutions within each of those kind of categories for the reasons that you mentioned, right? It's the degree of harm that could be done by the breach of that data that they are considering, right? Protected A is kind of what I think Charlie referred to earlier. It's not that important if it does sort of get breached. It's an inconvenience, maybe a bit more, but it's not going to end anybody's life or put them at harm, whereas you get into a patient record and it's not available or it's compromised, you got a real problem, particularly if you're the patient.
I'm hoping someone breaks into the Ministry of Transportation and changes my driving record. That would be a good thing, but not my health record.
Yeah.
Take off list of merit points, please.
Rob, any last thoughts on?
Well, I guess I think I'm from a little different perspective. For me, it's what has worked is to build cross-functional teams, and it's like walking across between those three boxes.
So kind of how we ended up in the middle sort of
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah, and walk both ways on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I trust the technical that's IT. I don't go there, but the connection between the three groups, the technical people and then the analytics and the end users, and that's a conversation that once we got it going has actually started to move the culture away from silos.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and I think kind of echoes some of the things that Charlie was saying. Bob, I've kind of had my back to you most of the presentation, so last opportunity to chime in here.
I think there's three areas that I think are worthy of looking at, and addressing policy issues is important, right? Understanding how that data is going to be accessed, who is accessing it, retention rates, all of those different things, and having visibility into that, right? So at any moment in time, can we track what's happening, what's being done? Involving stakeholders is important. One of the things that we learned, before we started talking about cloud, we talked about, taking and consolidating from the edge into the data center. And a lot of the people that were doing the framework design and stuff were impacted heavily by that because it could be removing their jobs. And a lot of what I found is that the people who are going to be essential to help build that strategy to push your data in the cloud are the people who are going to feel that they're at risk for their role. So making sure that they're aware that they can redesign themselves and do something different that's more important to the organization or than just what they're doing today. The guy who's managing the Oracle database is still going to be doing that while it's sitting out in the cloud. So the guy who's changing the hard drives, he could be the next guy that's going to be helping evolve your business somewhere else in the next iteration of what you do. So those are the things that I think are really important. And then the last piece of that is data integrity. As we get that snowball effect happening where we put some data out in the cloud and people start mining it and they start getting more information. I worked for a reporting company for Cognos for many years, and one of the things that always became a challenge for us was once you have many different ways to access that data, you have many different ways to make mistakes while you're reading that data. We had a scenario where one of our products got sold to the federal government, and two different analysts were doing work on the same data set, and they came up with $1 million in funding that was misplaced. And at the end of the day, it turned out it was a mistake in the report that was made. So understanding how that data is being mined and how it's being leveraged is really important as we start to get more people accessing it that weren't using it before.
That's some great points there, Bob. Thanks for concluding on that note. Just as we move forward, I just wanted to thank everybody who, particularly those who contributed to this. This was a volunteer effort. It was not paid. And it wasn't just the 4 folks that have been contributing today. Members of their teams were in support as well. So roughly we had about 10 or 12 people contributing to this paper. InsightaaS did a great job of kind of coordinating the effort for us and really distilling the findings down to something that was consumable by us and hopefully by others in the marketplace. We got a lot of value from this as the sponsor. And I should also mention, as I referenced that our co-sponsor on this effort was Riverbed Technologies. Brian from Riverbed is in the room here today. And we've got a great working relationship with them. And a lot of what we've talked about today actually has relevance to the technologies that we sell on their behalf. So they were right there with us through this process. So thank you to our 4 panelists today. Thanks to all of you for attending. The last slide, I think, does indicate that you can get a copy. Kevin, I'm just looking to you. Is there a...
Yeah, so there, if you guys want to break down that
Oh.
web address. No, I'm kidding. The QR code, if you've got an iPhone, your QR code, you can take a picture of it. It'll actually play right to the website to download the link, or you can take a picture of that, save it.
I'll stand back so I'm not photo bombing your
Paul,
QR code.
I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of Shan Sutherland. He's
Absolutely. Sorry,
He's
Shan.
our, he does all the data protection and management in Europe. It's a monumental job just to keep all that 10 petabytes of data protected.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Sham. I didn't notice that you're sitting in the back of the room there. Just for the other contributors, because in addition to Sham, there was other folks from eHealth, from Fanshawe, from Sick Kids Hospital. When you download the white paper, you will see everybody, their name, their title, their contribution. So thanks to all of those and the folks that have been in the room today. Hopefully you found this useful, and if you'd like to further the conversation, I'll bring my posse out with me and we can have it. All right, thanks very much.